November 9, 1983. In a secret underground bunker in Moscow, extreme tension gripped the highest officials of the KGB. A series of flash or top priority messages were arriving from their agents in Western Europe. According to the messages, the highest alert level, DEFCON 1, had been declared at US nuclear bases across Europe. Aircraft carrying nuclear bombs were being refueled directly on the runway without standard engineering checks. Everything pointed to an impending nuclear first strike. In the Kremlin, the leader of the Soviet Union and former head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, faced an unprecedented situation. Should he wait for an American attack, or should he order a preemptive nuclear strike to save his own country? While the world's ordinary people were busy with their daily lives, behind the scenes, a series of misunderstandings and escalating suspicions brought the Earth closer to nuclear annihilation than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. How did a routine military exercise nearly start World War III? And how did the world's population unknowingly survive this catastrophe? In today's episode, we will explore the complete story of the most dangerous and almost unknown chapter of the Cold War. To understand the context of this story, we must go back to the beginning of the 1980s. This was a new and extremely heated phase of the Cold War, known by many historians as the Second Cold War. Mistrust and hostility between the two superpowers were at their peak. The leadership of the Soviet Union was operating with a kind of sick and paranoid mentality. After the death of Leonid Brezhnev, former KGB chief Yuri Andropov came to power. Andropov literally believed that the United States was planning a surprise nuclear attack, a decapitating first strike, to destroy the Soviet leadership. His belief was so profound that he launched a massive intelligence operation codenamed Operation Ryan, or Vryan, an acronym for the Russian phrase Raketno-Yadernoye Napadenie, or nuclear missile attack. Its purpose was to collect information from KGB agents scattered around the world that could predict an impending US attack. This operation led KGB agents to look for signs of a conspiracy in everything, creating a kind of confirmation bias. Meanwhile, in the White House, President Ronald Reagan was in power. Reagan was known for his staunch anti-Soviet stance. He famously called the Soviet Union an evil empire and announced the largest peacetime military budget in American history. He also planned an ambitious missile defense system called the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars, which would destroy Soviet missiles from space. To the Soviets, these actions were extremely aggressive and reinforced their belief that America was preparing for war. The year 1983 was particularly tense. In September, the Soviet military shot down a South Korean passenger plane, KAL-007, mistaking it for a US spy plane. This incident resulted in the deaths of 269 innocent passengers. In response, the United States deployed advanced Pershing II nuclear missiles in West Germany, capable of hitting Moscow in just 10 minutes. These events made both sides more suspicious and belligerent towards each other. Amidst this extreme tension, NATO organized one of its annual military exercises, named Able Archer. It was a command post exercise, meaning it was a war simulation conducted at headquarters without the use of actual troops or weapons. Its purpose was to test how NATO would decide to use its nuclear weapons in the event of a nuclear crisis and to evaluate the effectiveness of that process. This exercise was held annually, but the 1983 drill was different from any before and deeply alarming to the Soviets for several reasons. First, Able Archer 83 simulated a full-scale war for the first time. It started with a conventional conflict and gradually escalated from DEFCON 5, peacetime status, to DEFCON 1, nuclear war imminent. This extreme realism sowed suspicion in the minds of the Soviets. Second, the exercise used highly secret and new-generation coded communication systems for the first time. Soviet intelligence could not break these codes, which further heightened their anxiety. Third, for the first time, the exercise included the direct participation of heads of state. Leaders like British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl took part in the simulation, making the exercise seem much more significant than a mere drill. Furthermore, at one stage of the exercise, NATO forces observed radio silence. This is a standard procedure just before launching a real nuclear attack. Even as part of the drill, US nuclear bases in Europe raised their alert levels from one stage to the next. From the outside, it was impossible to distinguish between a simulated alert change and a real one. All these events combined to create the belief in the Soviet Union that Able Archer 83 was perhaps not a regular exercise, but a cover or a ruse to mask preparations for a real nuclear attack. As KGB agents across Europe began to witness these unusual events, they sent a stream of urgent messages to their headquarters, the Moscow Center. The information they sent was alarming. They reported that NATO was not just conducting an exercise, their activities exactly matched the preparations for a real war. When this information was checked against the pre-established checklists for Operation Ryan, the analysts at the KGB and the military intelligence agency GRU in Moscow grew deeply concerned. They were seeing almost all the signs they had been looking for. It seemed to them that the West was truly preparing for a surprise nuclear attack. In response, the Soviet military took extreme precautionary measures. Soviet nuclear-capable aircraft in East Germany and Poland were armed with live warheads and placed on 30-minute alert. The Soviet Union's most powerful nuclear missiles, the SS-20s, were also put on high alert. The Soviet Fourth Air Army in the Baltic region was prepared for war. The KGB ordered all its agents to halt all other activities and focus solely on finding final proof of an impending nuclear attack. The Soviet Union was sitting with its finger on the trigger. Any small misunderstanding or a single piece of misinformation could have started an all-out nuclear war. While the world unknowingly stood on the brink of destruction, one person played a crucial and almost unbelievable role in de-escalating the crisis. His name was Oleg Gordivski. Gordivski was a high-ranking KGB colonel and the head of the KGB station in London. But he was also a double agent, secretly working for the British intelligence agency MI6. Because of this dual role, he found himself in a dilemma. On one hand, he could see the panicked and urgent messages coming from Moscow to the London KGB station. On the other hand, he had direct contact with British intelligence. Gordivski realized that the Kremlin's fear and paranoia were not an act. They genuinely believed that America was about to attack. He quickly conveyed this terrifying situation to his MI6 handlers. He reported that the Soviet Union was not bluffing. They were truly fearing a nuclear attack and were preparing for it. This information from Gordivski was, in a word, priceless. Until then, US and British intelligence had noticed the Soviet military activity, but had dismissed it as a routine reaction or a standard drill. They had not understood how terrified the Soviet leaders were. Gordivski's warning opened the eyes of Western leaders. They realized that they had inadvertently poked a sleeping bear and that the situation was spiraling out of control. Based on the information provided by Gordivski, Western leaders likely took steps to calm the situation. NATO concluded its exercise on November 11, 1983, as scheduled and without any escalation. When the Soviets saw that the exercise had ended and no attack had occurred, they gradually stood down their military forces from high alert, and the world pulled back from the brink of a terrifying nuclear war. But the general public knew nothing of it. This incident had a deep and lasting impact on President Ronald Reagan. When he was briefed in detail about the crisis and the genuine fear of the Soviets, he was reportedly horrified. He wrote in his diary, "I have a feeling the Soviets are so paranoid about a first strike, they might do something very reckless." This realization brought about a huge change in Reagan's mindset. He moved away from his hardline evil empire rhetoric and became proactive in seeking direct dialogue and arms control treaties with the Soviet Union. This shift would later help him sit down for historic meetings with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and pave the way for the end of the Cold War. And Oleg Gordivski? In 1985, the KGB discovered his betrayal, but with the help of MI6, he managed to escape from the Soviet Union in a dramatic and daring operation. This double agent passed away just recently, in March of this year. The Able Archer 83 crisis was a war scare that proves how perilously the world was hanging by a thread during the Cold War. Although not as famous as the Cuban Missile Crisis, many experts believe it was possibly the most dangerous moment of the late Cold War. This event teaches us several important lessons. It shows how misunderstanding, communication gaps, and extreme paranoia between two sides can turn a small incident into a massive crisis. It is also an example of the intelligence flaw known as mirror imaging, where one side incorrectly assumes that its enemy thinks just like it does. The greatest irony is that the very military exercise designed to prepare for a nuclear war almost started a real one.